Thank you so much, Nick, for that introduction and for sharing that video. We are coming at you live now from the Green Zone, where I'm with the founder and CEO of NCX, Zack Parisa, and I'm also here with the head of science of NCX, Spencer Meyer. So first, over to you, Zack. Hello.
Hey, Sweta, great to be with you.
And great to see you, Spencer.
Great, so glad to be here tonight, Sweta.
So gentlemen, tell me a little bit, Zack, let's start with you,
Sure.
about what NCX is for our audience that might not be familiar.
Yeah, sure, what's NCX? So the Natural Capital Exchange is basically a data-driven market that democratizes access to natural capital markets for every landowner. We use satellite imagery and AI to quantify the benefit that landowners can create by growing their forests longer, year over year. And we, taking that carbon and climate benefit, we roll that into a credit and make that available for net zero pioneering companies.
Well, what made you come up with something like this as a solution to tackle this climate crisis we're all in?
I've been passionate about conservation since I was little, and I've done work in Brazil, Bolivia, Armenia, and I saw the need for people to have fair incentives to encourage them or make it economically feasible for them to engage in conservation efforts and to be able to measure and pay for that so that landowners, whether that be communities or individuals, know that they're getting paid fairly for that outcome, and that organizations like responsible businesses that want to create that positive outcome know that they got what they paid for. And so that's what led me to focus on the data aspect, and past work in that over the last decade sort of indicated, or I saw ways that we could improve upon the original work that we started out with and create better mechanisms that scale more readily for everyone to participate.
And so clearly NCX is data-driven. It's all about science. It's about evidence. And Spencer, you as the head of science, why is it so critical that NCX is entrenched in all things data?
Well, it's really important because forests are really one of the great wonders of the world, and they have so many things going on, and it's very complicated but important to measure forests, not only for the climate and carbon benefits, but for the biodiversity and other many clean air and clean water benefits that we get from forests around the world. And so we've started in the United States, where there's really good inventory data on the ground in the forest, inventory data from our federal government. And we combine that and traditional forestry measurements with cutting-edge remote sensing and satellite information. And our engineering team has built a platform to combine these data. So we can measure forests, and we can measure change in forests across very large areas. That's going to allow us to scale up carbon opportunities for individual people and landowners and communities to all participate in this climate crisis.
And what made you want to work in this space, just to get a little personal touch going here?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've also been involved in forests, lived in forests, grew up in forests, and been very passionate about forests for a very long time. I'm a forester and landscape ecologist by training, and what I've realized over time is that the public is gaining so many benefits from our forests that landowners are just not compensated for. So if we really want to unlock these benefits and increase the carbon storage in our forests, we need to provide access to the carbon markets for forests. So coming from the nonprofit world and the academic world, what I realize is that working with the private sector on a highly scalable model is really the way to do that, to bring forests widely to the climate community.
You know, some of the criticism that you hear about the offsets market is that, do we really need this? Why shouldn't we just ask companies to eliminate their emissions?
So we absolutely have to begin, taking every opportunity that we can to bend the arc on climate change. We have to change everything in the economy as quickly as we possibly can, but we can't turn on a dime. We have to transition every tractor from diesel to electric, or running on a sustainable grid. And while we're making those critical transitions, while we're making all of those investments included in, to transition the economy, to create direct air capture, like machines that can pump carbon back into the crust, forests are really the first best option that we have to actively remove carbon from the atmosphere and reduce emissions. And they're a way to actively engage with communities across the entire world to build resilience into both the ecological and social systems that are at greatest risk to climate change. And so when we talk about the importance of offsets are good because they're the ambulance ride to the hospital. They don't solve climate change. We're not going to forest our way out of climate change, but we absolutely need these critical pieces to allow that time, because we don't have time, to make that transition to the decarbonized economy of the future that we desperately need.
No, absolutely. That was said very well, because we need to meet people where they are. The reality is we're in a climate crisis and we have to have all the tools in our toolkit. And so forests have a lot of potential. And for carbon storage, obviously, but they've also made a lot of headlines. Why are these headlines out there? Is it warranted, Spencer?
Well, innovation, it can be a slow process at times, but it's important to keep going. So the first generation of carbon offsets and natural capital has really paved the way for all of us in the climate community. And we've learned a ton about how to measure forests. We've learned a ton about how to work with landowners. And now we're in a position as a climate community to do better, to improve all the time. So we think, precision measurements, even at large scales, is the way to improve upon a lot of the shortcomings that we've seen in the nature-based climate community so far. In fact, our very program at NCX has been designed to mitigate some of those risks we've seen in the market so far. Some of the long-term projections and modeling that carbon projects have had to do in the past, we believe bringing those into shorter time frames where we have better precision on estimates, for example, about what's going to happen in the future with forests, is a really important way to increase trust and transparency in the carbon markets.
And is that part of what would make these offsets more reliable if we were able to make the data more transparent? Is that going to be a positive, you think, for the offsets market?
Absolutely. Transparency leads to trust, and it requires, we have to have trust, not only trust among landowners, knowing that they're getting paid fairly for the positive outcomes that they can create, not just for carbon, but for biodiversity, for water. And we have to have trust on the buyer end. And when I say buyer, I mean the public. I'm talking about businesses, I'm talking about governments. And so, yes, data and transparency of information about how those credits are created. Because remember, no one's taking physical delivery of this stuff. Microsoft isn't getting a dump truck load full of carbon dumped onto their porch or something like that. They have to rely on measurements. These positive outcomes are happening somewhere out in the woods, and so the better clarity we can provide with transparency of information and data, the more certainty we can have, and the more we can make confident investment that we must into the offsets to close the gap as we're making all of those shifts in the economy to decarbonize and achieve our ambitious goals.
Well, I don't know if that's Air Force One, but we're live from the green zone when you hear that kind of vehicle taking off overhead. So I'm going to ask you, Spencer, to add to that. Are there any other evolutions in carbon markets that have made offsets more reliable?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I think over time we're improving our ability to measure and store carbon on the ground, and that comes by looking at the difference between what would happen in a so-called business as usual scenario and what happens when you incentivize landowners to change their behavior over time. It's not enough to know how much our forests are storing at any one time. A lot of measurements so far have been focused on what is occurring now. But what we need to focus on is what can be different. How much more can we do in the future? After all, the forests that we have is part of the status quo of where we are with our climate crisis. So we need to do even more in our forests. And that requires leading to behavior change. So we need to work with landowners, meet them where they are, and provide them the proper economic incentives to change what they're doing on the ground, as long as it fits within their other management objectives. So while we're doing that and getting precision measurements on forestry, we're also beginning to do deep R&D about biodiversity. Because we know as we're solving the climate crisis, we can't just optimize for carbon. If we only optimize for carbon, we're going to end up making some big mistakes. We're going to end up losing a lot more biodiversity that we have, and then we'll have other problems that we can't live with on this planet. So as we're learning how to measure forest carbon, we need to be doing a better job measuring other critical benefits like biodiversity and water quality. And at NCX, we're really excited to do that. And that's why we're called the Natural Capital Exchange, because we have a vision for doing this for the full suite of benefits that we all receive from the forests and other ecosystems around the world.
So measuring all of this actually is so much more than just carbon, right? And the impacts are beyond forests. It's about entire ecosystems. So talk to me a little bit more about that, Zach. Like, what are you hoping to restore in addition to forests, potentially?
Well, so everyone knows that forests are more valuable than just what you can cut down and roll away, more valuable than just the timber, right? Just like Spencer was talking about, carbon, biodiversity, water, and also the social benefits that we receive from these places. And so by measuring and crediting benefits that communities can create and helping pay and incentivize for those benefits to build resilience into those systems, we can get the landscape of the future that we actually need. And so by changing our economy, by including all of those important aspects into the decisions that we make, that's the path to leaving this century in better shape than we found it. That's how we fix capitalism. That's how we start creating resilient communities, both, again, social and ecological.
Okay, so this isn't just about restoring forests. We all love restoring forests, and we definitely want to overcome the climate crisis. But now we're talking about sustainable capitalism. I love it. There's a lot of impact and positive outcomes that can stem from the work that you're doing at NCX. But you've got your challenges too, right? Why is working with nature so hard?
Well, these systems are wildly complex. Sitting here in 2022, we don't know everything about how forests function. We don't know everything about how forests function, particularly in a social context where there's so much nuance to the decisions that are made and the outcomes that we get from that. We're going to consistently learn, and we'll know more in 2025 about how the economy and ecology confluence works. And so we have to have a learning mentality. We have to have a mentality of iterative improvement in the way that we work with these systems that we are part of. And so it is challenging simultaneously because it's complicated, and it's challenging also because the benefits that we all need and that we can sit in our home and know that we want elsewhere, we don't know if it's happened without clarity and certainty on measurements. Again, you're not taking physical delivery. You can know you like a cup of coffee because you drink it. You take delivery of that. But with these other things like natural capital that occur elsewhere, we have to get good measurements and clarity and trust that we can have among buyers and among sellers. And once we have that connected to the products and services that we consume, then we can start building the better world that we actually need.
And Spencer, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's all about the economic incentives and drivers. If you think about the great renewable energy boom, how did the government help us transition to LED light bulbs? And how did they help us transition little by little to solar? They provided little economic nudges to make it easier for people to make the decision to choose the decision that was better for the planet. That's what we're doing on the forest. We're helping landowners nudge into making slightly different decisions than they would have otherwise. A slight change in how they manage their forests, whether it's delay a harvest or increasingly over time, it'll be things like changing how they manage their forest habitat to increase biodiversity for certain kinds of species in different places. So we're talking about working within the economic system that we all live in our daily lives, the pressures that we all face, whether we're landowners or scientists or business people, and using that to change the physical system around us, using that to change the climate crisis that we're in. And like Zach said earlier, we're really focused on action today. Just as we don't have times name implies, we do not have that time. We cannot wait for all the perfect solutions down the road. So it's critical to work with the solutions that we do have today.
And one of the themes that you've both been raising now is trust, right? And so clearly this is what is going to make or break the success of these offsets. And how can purchasers know then that their carbon credits are actually good?
Yeah. So for purchasers, as they're working within this community, to engage actively in the conversation about what constitutes quality, and to expect developers like NCX to demonstrate to them through transparent information the efficacy of the work being done. And as we start to all work together and get clarity on what quality looks like, and begin sort of engaging actively in that conversation, you're going to have a distillation of what is trustworthy and what we can invest in together.
As a behavioral scientist, I love this. This is all music to my ears because it's not necessarily intuitive to think the role of trust would be that much of a game changer in the outcomes of success for a business. But you get it and you're applying it. And I'm curious if Spencer also, as the head of science, is this social science something that registers on your radar?
Absolutely, it does. I often think if I weren't an ecologist or forester, I would have been a behavioral economist. This stuff really fascinates me. I think if we want solutions at scale, we need to work with the people who have the opportunity to contribute to this. And the way to do that, we know, is to incentivize them to change things. And so this idea of giving nudges, as I said before, I think is super important. So while I don't consider myself a social scientist, I really get really excited about how this is changing people's minds. The number of landowners that have come to us that have been really excited to participate in these programs has just been a game changer compared to the number of landowners, typically larger landowners, that have been able to access the carbon markets in the past. And you think about around the world, who owns a lot of the assets, the farms and the forests around the world? It is smallholders, whether that's in the United States or in developing countries. And what we want to be able to do is allow them to participate, not just from helping on the solution, but we want them to benefit from the revenue side of this as well. So it's important to us to make sure that the landowners who are producing these benefits are getting a significant portion of the revenue from these carbon offsets. And so we think it's very important, particularly in developing countries and emerging markets, to have these deep connections with landowners directly.
That's incredible, and thank you for doing the work you're doing and bringing the message here to COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, in the Green Zone, where we're coming at you live. And curious what your thoughts are on COP27, how it's going so far. You've both been at COPs in the past, so how do you think this COP is measuring up for where we need to be in terms of reaching our global climate ambitions?
Well, the energy is great, and the conversations and engagement are, I mean, they're inspiring. It's that part's great, but just, again, we don't have time. And so while the conversations and the engagement around how we can invest is exciting, it's also, it's time to get to work. And that's, I feel that in every conversation that I'm in here with, with many colleagues. And to be able to work with these communities, to be able to go to work right now and store as much carbon as we possibly can, as quickly as we can in forests, using these systems as best as we can, and comprehensively focusing on things like carbon and beyond carbon biodiversity. I love hearing a lot about that, and I think that's that has come to the fore, not only in this COP, but in Glasgow as well. And that's, I'll just say I'm excited, but also anxious to get to work on this with, and again, reflected in every conversation.
Well, we hear the urgency, and we're hopeful that the outcomes will be aligned to what's needed and what so many different collaborators have demanded from from not-for-profits to for-profits alike. So, do you think, Spencer, that we are making the strides in the right direction at this COP and from your experience at previous COPs?
Yes, absolutely, Sweta. Earlier today, I had the good fortune of being on a roundtable that the Carbon Business Council pulled together with a bunch of sort of leaders in this community, everything from technological carbon removal to nature-based solutions to ocean blue carbon opportunities. And what really struck me is how much common ground there really is between these organizations. Everyone is really mission-driven here. We're all trying to fix the same existential problem that our globe has, and we really need to be working together with an all-of-the-above strategy here. We need these permanent long-term solutions that maybe aren't quite ready yet from a technology perspective, but that are going to be scaling quickly. But we also need to be working right now, immediately, to address this so that the problem that we have to solve doesn't actually get bigger while we're debating some of these things now. So we really have to avoid this analysis paralysis. And what I found today in this roundtable, working with people from very different perspectives, all working towards the same goal, is that there really is a lot of things we can work on together. We're going to do our part at NCX, and we know our colleagues in other organizations and all around the globe are going to be working on this together. So I was really buoyed by the experience here in Sharm el Sheikh.
Well, we're really thrilled to have you as a partner of We Don't Have Time. We are thrilled to showcase your work in the Nature Zone Pavilion in Sharm el Sheikh at COP27. Final question for you, gentlemen, is will we actually veer off this course that we're on to currently to 2.8 degrees warming if we continue business as usual? Can we actually meet the goals we put forward in Paris?
We can achieve like these ambitious targets, but we have to begin acting right now, and we have to start using every tool that we have. And for us, like Spencer so correctly stated, working with forests is the big lever, the first best option that we have, and the thing that we're going to be dedicated to making sure is moving us towards that envelope of 1.5 and reduce damage and loss to the society that we serve.
Same question to you, Spencer.
Well, the specific degree to goal I'm going to leave to the negotiators out there here at COP27. But like Zach said, I think what's really important is that we get started. We don't let uncertainty about what the goal is and whether we can get there, we don't let that get in the way of acting today. And I think that's a really critical message that I've heard from many folks here at COP27. We certainly know that on the whole team here at NCX, and the landowner partners we have, and our buyers in the corporate community and the NGO community. That's what our focus is going to be on.
Okay, and to the millions of viewers that are tuning in right now, I would love for Zach to shout out to them anything that you would like for them to do, to get behind, to support. We have their attention. So what would you like to say?
Oh man, I would just say get involved. There are so many options and ways that you can be part of the solution. We're focused on forests, but like Spencer mentioned, there's technology, there's social engagement, there's activism. You can be part of the solution too, and I'd strongly encourage you just to find what you're passionate about, find what you're most concerned with, look at your strengths, and engage. Get involved, because we don't have time, and we need your help. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. I'm going back to Nick in our studio. Back over to you, Nick, and thank you to NCX.